Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our ESG's Impact on Power and Utilities panel today. Can we click to the next slide, Allison? I am Andrea Tettleton, the Global President of the Women's Energy Network. Myself and Katrina Popel, our Global Treasurer, are on the call. We are backfilling for our Programming Director, Regina, today. She is traveling to the Philippines, so good for her. I just wanted to first, can you click the next slide, Allison? Give a huge thank you to our global corporate members and sponsors. Thanks to them, we are able to host events like this and provide you great content at the global level. And just in case you're unaware, we just want to highlight some upcoming global events. Hopefully you saw these in our email, on our website, and in Glue Up. On Tuesday, October 17th, we have Redefining Energy's Future with Dr. Julia Neishweit. On Thursday, October 23rd, we have an executive package negotiation with the Thoughtful Company. And on Thursday, October 24th, we have our WEN Global Annual Business Meeting, where we will be introducing you guys to our new slate of global board members. And then lastly, hopefully you guys are aware of this, but we do have a WEN podcast. You can listen to it on any of your favorite podcast apps, Spotify, Apple, what have you. It's really great. It was started at the Colorado chapter. We moved it up to the global chapter. We have really good content, great, thoughtful guest speakers. And so if you haven't checked it out, I really encourage you to do so. Katrina and I will be hanging on throughout the call if you have any WEN specific questions at the end. But I will hand it off to our, and this is, if you have any questions, again, to connect with us, is how you can reach us always. Our email, our website, and LinkedIn are all available. And I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for this panel. Andrea Strickland is an audit partner at KPMG LLP, serving as the financial services and energy industries. At KPMG, Andrea serves as a local environmental, social, and governance assurance resource, as well as a member of KPMG's network of women. Andrea works on both public and private and local and international companies. Andrea is executive member of the Women's Energy Network and serves on the board of the World Affairs Council for DFW. So I'll pass it off to Andrea.
Thanks, Andrea, for that introduction.
I think I actually muted Andrea instead of muting myself. So
sorry about that. Thanks, Andrea, for that introduction. Today we'll be talking about sustainability, or ESG, with a group of women who work on the forefront of sustainability. For those of you who are not familiar with ESG, it stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance, and the range of topics that's covered by ESG is far-reaching. If we can show the graphic on the next slide. The graphic on the next slide is from the SASB, or the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and it lists a few of the topics that are covered under ESG. As you can see, that includes not only the climate-related items which have received recent media attention, such as greenhouse gas emissions, wastewater management, and hazardous material practices, but it also covers social and human capital, as well as governance, or how businesses are run. Because these topics are wide-ranging, they have a large impact on business innovation and management, including changing demand, physical risks, as well as adapting to those changes via supply chain management. Having given that very brief introduction to ESG, I'd now like to introduce the women who will be speaking with us today. As I hand off to these ladies, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what in the ESG universe you're passionate about. First, Lynette Casey, Sustainability, Energy, Transition, and Decarbonization Change Leader at Siemens Energy.
Thanks, Andrea. So I'm Lynette Casey. I work for Siemens Energy. I've worked for the company for the last 22 years. And for most of my career, I worked with the utility industry, where about a third of the equipment that's on the grid comes from Siemens Energy. And so I worked across the country with our major utilities. In the last year, I've moved into the industrial space. So now I get to co-create with customers on onshore, offshore, and the marine space, and really help understand what they're looking at and what their sustainability goals are, and work with them. In my capacity, I'm the head of sales for EAD, which is electrification, automation, and digitalization. And I have all of the Americas from Canada to Argentina. So I get the fun, the most exciting thing I have is working with customers throughout that entire Americas geography. And they all have different goals and things they're passionate about, different equipment, legacy systems. And I get to come in and really help them audit their processes and help make a difference in each of their businesses. So that's what's most exciting to me. Thanks.
Thanks, Casey, for that introduction. Next, we have Claudia Garcia, who's responsible for sustainability planning and performance at Enel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Andrea. This is Claudia Garcia. I've been with Enel North America for almost 5 years now. And I lead now what is the sustainable plan performance, which is a lot of the reporting we do on our, let's say, on our the disclosures, let's say, that we are addressing, but also to our investors, both on the renewable side, but also let's say on reporting in anything we do around demand response and other activities. Prior to having joined Enel, I was actually with the United Nations for 7 years, working at the Food and Agriculture Organization. It was there that I really learned just like how global there's certain, the sustainable development goals are, but also how energy is always at the nexus of a lot of the key issues. It was only in that phase that I got really interested in energy and decided to join, the private sector side of it and see what impact I could have there. Very excited to be here. I'm very passionate about just the energy space overall, but also how there's other sectors that have a huge impact on it, as we well know. So yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Claudia. Okay, and next, I'd like to introduce Lizette Santana. She is responsible for corporate responsibility and sustainability at PPL.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, so I've been with PPL for almost 20 years now, and I am responsible. I report up to public affairs. That is our department, and so my role is different than Lynette and Claudia. I'm not actually like able to make any changes. I'm not like working on the operation side, but my job really is to gather that information, learn about what's happening in our different operating companies, tell our sustainability story to our investors, our stakeholders, our customers, our incoming employees, and make sure that we're transparent, that we're being compliant in all of our disclosures, but also in our voluntary disclosures. And so what excites me about the ESG space, having been in this for so long, is seeing how it has grown exponentially, at least the interest in it. I've always been in this space, always working on sustainability disclosures in one way or another. Sometimes we called them ESG reports, sometimes it was sustainability reports, kind of goes back and forth, but I've always been in this space, and seeing the interest level grow is very exciting. And then the other part of that, I work for utilities. I work for an energy holding company, but with our utilities, and our industry is very collaborative. So we don't really compete per se, right? We don't have to compete for customers. And so we work together closely to help move us all forward. And so when I meet with my peers and I learn about all the different things that are going on, whether that's updating our grid to modernize that and make sure that we can enable our customers to add more renewable energy and meet their own sustainability goals, or working with other companies on mutual assistance. So it just makes me excited that we're able to work together to move things forward. I do have hope for the future. I know all the climate change news can be very dire and sad, but when I get together with my peers, I'm like, okay, there are very smart people in this room working on solutions for that. So that's what I'm excited about.
Right. Thank you for that, Lizette. And finally, we have Mary Stefanidakis, She's responsible for clean energy solutions with Constellation.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. Mary Stefadakis at Constellation. I've been with Constellation 17 years. Constellation is the nation's largest producer of carbon-free energy. We own and operate the largest nuclear fleets across the United States. And we also service through our commercial businesses of wholesale and retail about 2 million customers. So pretty expansive. 3/4 of those customers are the Fortune 100 customers. So it's been evolving. There's been momentum in terms of finding ways to help customers reach their sustainability goals. My role in the commercialization and development team, we are constantly looking at emerging technologies, tools, platforms, services for customers, kind of like what Lisette and others had mentioned. There's a growing desire to find solutions. So we're looking to validate and pilot those to see what kind of the results they can bring. So I appreciate the opportunity on the panel today.
And thank you, Mary. And again, thank you to all of you ladies for joining us today to talk about sustainability. As an audit partner, I hear a lot about recent developments related to regulatory requirements, both as it relates to the SEC's climate proposal, which is expected to be finalized this year, which would require that companies disclose physical and transition risks greater than 1% of the related financial line item, as well as greenhouse gas emissions scope 1 and 2, and for some companies, potentially scope 3. Now that proposal is still subject to change. And we also have proposals expected to come out from the SEC related to human capital. In addition, across the world, we have the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which are also referred to as the CSRD, or Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And those standards are even further reaching. They relate to 10 separate topics, as well as 2 cross-cutting standards, and they cover not only climate, including greenhouse gas emissions, pollution, but also own workforce, affected communities, and business conduct. And the CSRD standards require that we consider not only financial statement impact, but also impact on people and environment. So opening this question up to the group, how are you seeing your company or other companies within your industry respond to these changing regulations?
Maybe I can start that off. So although Siemens Energy is not a publicly traded entity in the US, clearly we are in Europe, we are still subject to those SEC through our customers, right? So any of the US publicly traded companies will still require that us as a vendor provide compliant products to them, right, as they're dealing with the SEC. We of course have more of the European standards, I would say, but I do think we're seeing a lot. I mean, I'm in sales, so I can speak to what I see from the various procurement organizations. There are opportunities, I would say, for bonus malus. So in some of their procurement vehicles, they're giving credit for things like having, end of life plans for decommissioning in a sustainability way. Having local content, that's huge right now, especially with some of the DOE money that's coming out, and things need to be made in America. And then, I've also seen companies ask that you have certain registrations like the SA 8000, which deals a lot with human trafficking and human capital. And if you have that in place and have passed audits on those, you can potentially get a leg up over, another vendor, if you will. So some really interesting procurement vehicles that are driven by some of those frameworks and how it flows down through the vendors, not only locally, but globally as well.
Thank you.
I can pitch in. So to let folks know, Constellation last year split from our utility bills business in February of 2022. And with that, we start to reestablish goals and objectives as a new standalone company. We set out 3 goals. One, that we committed to from our new CEO, that we would be obviously delivering 100% carbon-free generation from all of our fleets by 2040. But also with that goal for 2040, 100% reduce all of our emissions associated with our own facilities and our own production areas. So those are 2 big pieces that we've been constantly looking at ways that it can evolve and exceed that before that goal line. One of the biggest piece, I will say, last year we had this huge goal that we sent every single customer that we serve a greenhouse gas report based on what we serve them, power and gas. it was a pretty enormous initiative, but one that was extremely important to begin to engage customers. What does it mean? What's scope 1? What's scope 2? Scope 3? What are ways you can reduce and emit? And what are the products and services out there? And how we can continue to educate and feed information to the customer base. We are very passionate around climate goals as a culture, and we are constantly looking at investments where we can, pilot and validate different solutions and ways that we can help customers. So it's been a great momentum, and we've gotten some great customer engagements, in terms of participating in pilots and looking at new solutions.
Okay. I can go next. So Enel North America falls under the Enel Group, and the Enel Group is, let's say, leading integrated player in all of the energy space in power and renewables markets. We're present in 30 countries. Enel North America just covers US, Canada, and then also, let's say, Mexico. So we do fall under, right, being that the Enel is headquartered out of Italy, we do fall under the CSRD in terms of what we are declaring. I can say, like, the biggest changes have been this notion of, there's a clear shift between like optional disclosures that are now mandatory, right? And also, just on behalf of a global utility, we're seeing that international reporting through regional regulations such as the CSRD, not only on climate, but other ESG disclosures aligned with double materiality, right? Even for non-ESU subsidiaries. I think 5 months ago, the GRI did a study where they said over 3,000 US and 1,300 Canadian companies will be directly pulled into CSRD or directly impacted on especially on the double materiality disclosure. What I can say I am seeing internally within the company and directly with my role is now there's this new sort of process that has been put in place to work directly with the finance administration team. So from our side, that's AFC, where we work hand in hand on internal controls and understand how that links to our finance, right? So basically, we're implementing internal controls to treat non-financial indicators to address process and data quality. Right. So I am directly working with our finance team, which in the past that was not the case. So it's just a really interesting time because I think there's different areas of our companies that are now working together, right? Especially as double materiality, other than pursuing or let's say mapping out business potential impacts on prioritization of sustainability topics for just reporting out. We're also getting an understanding on how those sustainability topics can have an impact on the business, and that's the financial materiality side of it.
Yeah, I want to echo that, Claudia. I think we're handling that in the same way. So even though we no longer have European operations, I think we were so used to reporting to European standards that we always have our eye on that. Our experience has been that if it starts in Europe, even if it doesn't directly affect us right now, it will eventually, because a lot of those standards kind of trickle down to the US. And I will echo what you said about working with financial. So that was kind of what I meant in my introduction. It's exciting now because it is on everyone's radar. When I started working on this, I would put this report together and really no one cared. And now everyone cares, up to the board. Finance is very involved in that. We're working very closely with them because of the SEC rule that's coming out, kind of integrate our processes a little bit more, at least on the metric that will be reported in SEC documents. So cybersecurity, human capital, and emissions, all, and like I feel like it's eventually going to be everything, because now I'm kind of hearing inklings about maybe biodiversity and natural capital. So it's always evolving, but having that connection with finance now down to the point where like they're allowing us to access their tools to work with them. That I think is a big change that we're seeing here internally. Yeah, and I think where our disclosures are better for it. The other change I don't know if everybody else is experiencing this, but it seems like when I started working on this, we would get credit for disclosing and transparency. And now it seems like a lot of these frameworks really want to see action. Like, what are you doing? It's not really just about giving you a rating on like, oh, thank you for telling us. They want to see it, right? They want to see the metric, they want to see the goals, they want to see your progress towards those goals. And so kind of evolving our own disclosures to meet that new expectation is something that we're working on constantly.
Yeah, I think on the disclosure and the action, just one last thought, is especially here in US utilities, there is an organization called the Sustainability Supply Chain Alliance, and over 20 US utilities are members, right? And that entity has grown so much over the years. And as a vendor, we are subject to answer their questions. And it's really, in some utilities, it's a way to qualify whether or not someone can be on the approved vendor list. If you don't get a good enough ranking or rating on their scorecard, then you may not even be able to bid on things, right? So that action piece is very serious, and the accountability for it is very serious.
Right. And I'll say that we're seeing similar groups and other organizations, principles for responsible investing, that are wanting transparency from companies that they invest in. And as an audit partner, I feel obligated to mention that some of these standards are going to eventually require assurance of these metrics that are being disclosed. And so what you ladies are saying about those topics moving within financial reporting and establishing controls is exactly what eventually your auditors are going to want to see, in terms of making sure that the numbers that are disclosed are accurate and that people are using a consistent framework. So thank you. That's really informative, and it's nice to see that people are excited about these changes. I'll say some people are excited about these changes, but so moving on from just the financial reporting aspect, how have you seen new opportunities or challenges arise from the focus on ESG? I know you just alluded to some changes in how supply chain is screened, and I think someone also mentioned something regarding fundraising. So within your companies, is there anything you guys can add about changes you're seeing related to this increasing focus on ESG?
I mean, I think from our perspective, pretty much everything I do all day long in some way goes back to a customer's decarb focus, and which ultimately goes back to some of these frameworks and some of the things that they have to report back to their shareholders, right? And so there's all kinds of opportunity, literally all day long. We're electrifying something, we're automating something, we're digitizing something, we're replacing old equipment, making it more efficient, or ripping out diesel and replacing it with electric, right? So literally all day long, that's what we do. So there lots of opportunities. I think also I mentioned earlier the DOE, there's a ton of money coming out of the DOE on a ton of different topics right now, right? And there's opportunities there not only for the DOE funding, but embedded in that there is, as I mentioned, like Made in America, either requirements or requests, I would say. But beyond that, there's specific language and opportunities in there for tribal nations, for women-owned, veteran-owned businesses. So really, adding, trying to level the playing field, I would say, for some of those marginalized communities that really now have access to a pot of money in this space that probably did not have it before. To say nothing of the venture capital and the private equity, billions and billions of dollars in this space right now. So, I mean, all day opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. And to echo on that, I know that last year, for anyone working in the solar industry, we saw a huge sort of bottleneck, and that was on the obtaining the supply needed for, of PV panels, right? They were kind of, because of where they were coming from, there was a situation where they were kept at the port. And then, obviously that has sort of encouraged, that has encouraged sort of other options to be sought in terms of how can we do more onshore manufacturing. So the Inflation Reduction Act has encouraged onshoring manufacturing. We can also recently, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, we saw that Vestas has committed $40 million for let's say wind turbine manufacturing in Colorado. For Enel specifically, the case that I talked about around PV panels being a limited supply in 2022, and there being a direct impact for the business, we're now That situation has paved way for solar cell and solar panel manufacturing in the U.S. through $1 billion, gigafactory. So we will continue to see, and you may know already, we will continue to see sort of those growing number of capital commitments on domestic manufacturing.
Yeah, I will say the funding that's available, like both Claudia and Lynette said, that enables, right, in terms of a focus area. You'll talk to a customer and where there's a lot of funding and grants, that's where they start. And I think that's kind of the use case they use to kind of expand and learn and how they can develop more capital to achieve their goals. The other piece, emerging technologies, we have an investment portfolio, and I will tell you what's been great to see over the last few years, more women entrepreneurs in emerging tech. When I first started to look at all the different pitches, and we look at everything from tools and platforms and services, mostly male dominated. And, now we're starting to see more women come out, gain support with the funding and, leveraging kind of their ideas for innovation. So that's been great. So that's one of the takeaways here, ladies. If you have an idea and you have that entrepreneurial spirit, grasp it. It can solve a lot of solutions for the future. So definitely great to see that momentum in the innovation space.
Mary, that was really a perfect lead in to the next question, which is how would you respond to critiques that ESG is a fad? We'll move to that one first before we get into innovation and change.
I'll pick it up. You get on a customer call, some are almost forced to the table to discuss it, right? Because of investors, consumers, the communities by which they operate in. I don't think it's a fad. I'm not, when you look at the financial risk, we look at the physical risk associated supply chain, it's a total all-in business risk if you want to, operate and continue forward. So there's money associated with physical impacts and then community impacts around just obviously the health of the community. So can be a slower process with folks depending on the stage by which they're really ready to commit. But one that we have a lot of, obviously, like I mentioned, a lot of support from our organization to continue to help and educate. And it can be a slow kind of process for some customers, but we believe in a cleaner future. I think everybody here does. So we will continue to obviously support that and help customers where they start and then continue along the path.
I'll just jump in there. I recently moved offices, and part of my task was moving all of our old annual reports and materials and putting it into our archives. And I found greenhouse gas emission reports from like the 1990s and an electric vehicle file full of materials like talking points, FAQs, customer messaging from like the 1980s. This is not a fad. It's something that many of us probably on this call have been working on for decades. Many more other people have been working on it prior to that. And as Mary said, any company that's not taking into consideration all the risks that are inherent with a changing climate, with human capital, you're not running your company well, right? You're not being transparent. You're not focused on governance. You're not running your company well. And so why would people invest in that company? And so it's not a fad. It's just a way of doing business. One of the exciting things about that, again, is that it is on everyone's radar now. And our sustainability strategy is now integrated into our business strategy. And so that's huge for us. That is and it was always tied together, but now that it literally feeds one into the other. Our executives have goals related to our emissions target and our energy reduction goals. That's included in executive compensation packages. So we're running our business for the long term. And so sustainability has to be a part of that. And looking at ESG, making sure that you are being responsible for the environment, for your employees, for the communities you serve, is just part of doing business.
Yeah, I'd like to echo on that, because I also see it as like as a significant risk to not report on what we are doing, right? Our governance system, what we are doing. Expectations and performance and accountability for companies in the non-financial areas will continue to increase. I think it was a panelist in the Climate Week So last week with Climate Week in New York, and there was a panelist speaking, and he basically kind of framed it on, let's pretend we don't call ESG SG, but 21st century business risk and opportunities. Like this is currently, this is now kind of the status quo. This is why we're working on it. So it's not just like a short-term fad. And I love, Lisette, that you found archives, in the system, just how far back that goes. And
We
probably right.
literally looked at it and we're like, oh, great. We don't have to write anything for our customers. Almost all the messaging was still the same, except for the cars looked new. And like, if anybody wants to see it, I have one. And like the cars were all like really small, little square cars from the 80s, but they were electric. We were trying to make it happen back then. So hopefully we can make it stick this time.
Yeah, I don't think it's a fad either. I think it's just a reorganization, right? It's lumping all of these things together in these 3 letters into an acronym. And now we're starting to see this coagulation of like, what does that mean? And the frameworks. And I think when someone like the SEC comes in and layers it in the same way as financial auditing, requirements for you to be publicly traded, that's a pretty serious step. And it speaks to, it's not a fad, right? I think, Claudia, I totally echo what you said that the speaker said. It's just how we do business now. It's maybe the ESG is, a buzzword, if you will, and maybe that will evolve and change, but the business practices behind it, they're not going away, right?
I'll say that KPMG reviewed comment letters received in response to the SEC's climate proposal. And although stakeholders raised legitimate concerns related to operability and transition time related to some of the requirements, 79% were in favor of the standards, and that's largely driven by investors. So there does seem to be widespread support for ESG reporting. And just observing what I see in my neighborhood, I've seen more solar panels put up on houses and more Teslas in driveways than I would have even imagined possible just 10 years ago. So obviously we're moving forward, and it seems like the pace is just steadily increasing. And so now with Mary's lead in, and I'll use this as another lead in, final set question for the panelists before we take some questions from the audience, if anyone has any. How do you feel the ESG goals have been effective in driving innovation and change?
Yeah, so again, I mean, every single day I'm innovating with customers, right? And I work for a great company where we have lots of tools in our toolbox, if you will. So it's kind of like I've explained it to my mom before, right? It's like showing up at a customer with a box of Legos. Like, what do you want today? Oh, you want a fighter jet? Great, I've got Legos for that. Oh, you want the Eiffel Tower? I've got Legos for that, right? And so we have a lot of pieces in our toolkit to be able to just show up and work with a customer on what it is their hopes and dreams are and what their constraints are. And some of that innovation, I think any of the buzzwords that, I've been involved in over the last couple of years, I mean, hydrogen, the whole hydrogen economy and everything that's going on with hydrogen right now, I think really came from us trying to find a more sustainable fuel, a more sustainable option, blending hydrogen into things and away from fossil fuels. CCUS is certainly a conversation now in ways that maybe it hadn't been in the past. Small modular reactors, right? And Mary could maybe speak to the nuclear renaissance, frankly, that we're going through, and how some will debate clean energy versus green energy, right? Nuclear is clean energy. It's depending on your geopolitical view of nuclear, some countries think different things, but it certainly is a very clean, sustainable fuel when compared to other fuels, right? And here in the US, and folks like Constellation are seriously having a renaissance and renewing nuclear plants for the duration, right? For multiple more decades. And that is really in response to wanting to have clean energy. So lots of different technologies going on, tons of them.
Yeah, I recently heard this phrasing of sustainability is the aim, innovation is the tool. I don't know if you've heard that. But I've just come, like last week I was at NREL, right? The National Renewable Energy Laboratory out in Golden. And it's all kind of like the future, right? It's all the research open topics on all, on all the renewable energy spaces. So it's really interesting to see just like how we're going to get to, right? Whether that's 90% decarbonization in our goals, and what that's going to lead to, and across all sectors. So NREL, I've learned a lot in terms of how we are, in all sectors, how we kind of are advancing and how we are innovating in the ideas. I think to not do innovation, like your business will die, right? Like we have seen that happen over and over again. So much so that, there's ISO 56,002, right? That looks at innovation management. So it is so integrated to sustainability. In order to have a sustainable business, you must innovate, right? So I think it's very core. There's no outside the box. And I think that if the culture at a company is not putting innovation at the forefront, I think there's a huge risk there, 100%.
Right. And that really comes back to the definition of sustainability, which is something that's able to continue over time. So if the goal is to continue over time, then sustainability seems like a necessary focus. But I may have cut you up. Mary, were you going to say something?
No. I was just going to piggy off for kind of Lynette around nuclear. When I first joined Constellation, nuclear was like not in vogue. Folks had a lot of concern obviously on that technology, and then I will give enormous credit to our regulatory team and others in the industry that help really showcase like what the benefits are for that, the environmental attributes that nuclear can deliver, and has delivered over many decades. So that's been a focus to us, as well as like Lynette had mentioned, testing hydrogen in a lot of areas. We're currently in some programs right now with some of the partners here. To find out how can we deliver that? How do we produce that? How do you transport it? Either, by truck or by wire? And what does that mean, right? And educating customers, which is huge, on what the benefits are and just the safety around that. So it's been a wonderful time. It's allowed us and others on this call to stand up new business lines. I think that's where, innovation drives, and really think about how the industry and everyone that has a seat at that table to really drive change. And it's not just through technology, but through people. I mean, all the initiatives around DEI and inclusion and getting different perspectives, how people view problems has really helped us evolve as a company. And I think that's really going to be key for the whole energy transition as future.
That's a good point, that like really right now there is a lot of emphasis on climate. Just, the SEC's proposal is climate change. Some of the ISSR's proposals are more climate focused. The CSRD is far reaching and covers all topics, but there has been a recent emphasis on climate. But the, human capital proposal from the SEC is expected later this year. So soon that focus is going to widen and expand to include the social aspects of ESG. And then of course governance is kind of entrenched in everything, just in terms of how are these businesses run. And while I didn't mention this as part of the SEC's climate proposal, there is also more of a focus on how do businesses manage climate risk. How do they respond to it? Okay, well, in terms of prepared questions, that's it. It doesn't seem that we have any questions in the chat from any of the attendees so far. I guess in closing, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which we can give everyone a little bit of time back in their day. But is there anything that anyone, thank you. Well, first of all, let me say thank you to all four of you for coming on this call and for providing your perspectives on sustainability and really how many different areas it impacts. As an accountant, I hear a lot about the reporting impacts and, how are we going to put this in the financial statements? How are we going to implement internal controls over this information? Like, how do you assure completeness, et cetera? But it's really interesting to hear about opportunities, both for fundraising as well as, supply chain and other potential challenges that come from this. We did receive one question on leveraging ESG metrics for facilities interested in energy management, but not familiar or concerned with ESGs. Okay.
So I'm not sure if that means internal facilities, but I can kind of piggyback on something Lynette said earlier, which was ESG really is just like the buzzword for this, but it is something we're already all working on. And so one of the ways we got our workforce kind of to buy into sustainability was just highlighting the things we were already doing that fell under the ESG umbrella, right? And when we started down this, it was sustainability, and feel like, oh, what's that? That's just another thing I'm going to have to worry about. Oh no, but you're already doing that. Hey, when you came up with that plan to, like, you know, add pollinator gardens in our right of way, that's sustainability. And so just kind of highlighting the things that were already being implemented and done, they just weren't thinking about it in the framework of ESG. So like kind of answering this question, like if they're not concerned with ESG, you could probably find some kind of connection with them about like what they're already doing, whether that's energy savings, that's better, that's great for the bottom line, right? They might already be doing some things or taking some steps toward this. They just don't see it as ESG because they don't know what that is. And so just kind of educating leadership, educating the workforce about what ESG is, what sustainability means for your company, right? Like everybody probably has a different definition of that. And so we defined it for us. What does that mean, right? We want to be here for the long term, not have a negative impact on the communities we serve while we're doing that, right? And so helping our workforce understand that and helping them identify some of the things they were already working on. Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times I have people call me and be like, hey, I'm doing this project. Could that be something that's in the report? I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. I'm like, we'll talk about it, blog about it. And it gets people excited about the work that they're doing, even if they never saw it as a sustainability project.
Right.
Yeah, looking at the question, when I think of facilities and operations folks, and we work a lot with people that are trying to solve a basic operational problem, which generally comes down to dollars and cents, right? Either they have very old equipment that's not very efficient anymore, and we can fix various settings on that to increase efficiency, expand life, all of those, and delay the really expensive capital cost. Or if we need to replace that piece of equipment and there is some capital budget, okay, well, what's the most energy efficient one we can look at? Others are using a lot of grid power, and now they're looking at, maybe I should have, combined heat and power on site. Maybe I should produce my own power because I've got huge furnaces here that suck up a lot of power, right? Can I electrify things? So it's really all of those you can tie back to an ESG, let alone the safety, right? If you have an old equipment that has emissions issues and your workers are breathing in smoke or whatever, right? There's basic health and safety things. All of those can be tied back to ESG, but they're all still operational concerns that ultimately are hitting the COO's bottom line from a dollars and cents perspective, right? And so you don't even need to say, we're going to come in and help you fix this thing because of ESG. No, it's about, how do we make it safer for your workers? How do we make your utility bills go down? Maybe how do we help you get cleaner, environment? So that's the way I would approach it. That's the way we do approach it.
I'm always very excited to meet people in the company that are, that haven't heard of ESG or have like a very narrow picture of sustainability, right? For a long time, we talked about sustainability only being environmental, right? So there was like this relationship. I know that like 1 month into the job, when I was, when I first started with Enel, I met with the entire wind operating fleet in the US. It was all the site supervisors at all of our wind plants. And they have so much responsibility, like to keep these, like, these power plants running, and everything they see, whether, they're taking good care of like the land, right? That we are essentially kind of, we are stewards of that land. So we want to be good neighbors to our communities. I mean, they're really like the front seat ambassadors of the company with our communities, right? So they play also a very visible role. So all of this, when I kind of shared and broke down like your role on a day-to-day, oftentimes is very much linked to sustainable efforts. And it was kind of mind blowing, like no way. So I think when we have those conversations, there's this recognition of like, hey, there is sustainability ownership from my side through my role. And I think sustainability ownership and linking, I always say I'm not going, like I'm not the sustainability like solver, right? I'm only facilitating and I'm educating on a day-to-day, but the knowledge is out there and it's amongst, the entire kind of like value chain of our company, right? It doesn't just sit with one person. And I think giving that recognition of like, no, like you said, Lisette, you're already doing it. It's already out there. We're only either just communicating, we're coming back to it, or we're putting a target to it, right? Because we want to do better. But it's all those conversations are in a way, it's kind of the process, right? We're going through, we're educating, we're sharing, we're also learning about other, our individuals' roles and how they link back to our sustainability efforts. But it is very much a company effort, and there has to be sustainability ownership.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer to that question, and I think it did bring up a lot of the other, a lot of the topics that we've been touching on throughout, which is the linkedness of ESG and the fact that there could be economic benefits as well. I know we see that in the larger energy industry as well, carbon recapture, reuse of water, etc. Lots of areas where it's the better choice for the environment, but it also saves money, which is a win-win. All right. Okay, we have reflecting on DEI. What is the current state of women and minority leadership in the energy and utilities sector? Have substantial progress been made since conversations about ESG first started? And I would say I'm curious if you guys have perspectives from the inside. I'd say that when these human capital proposals come out, there might be a better benchmark to measure this by, as there'll be more, comparable metrics and disclosure of metrics. But if you guys ladies have any thoughts from what you've seen within your own companies, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, again, from a vendor standpoint, responding to RFQs from procurement organizations, it's generally always a question about, what are you doing for small women-owned business, small women-owned minority business, right? And specifically anybody that does any business with the federal government, which is practically everyone in the US, needs to answer those questions. And so has enough work been done there? Probably not, right? We have a long ways to go. But I think there's an acknowledgement that's a problem. So that's the first step. And then there are some people taking it very seriously and asking for accounting on these topics. I've also been really encouraged by, even in the venture space, work with, our company has a venture arm of which a woman is the head of that. So that's encouraging. She has many women that work for her. And then we also work with Breakthrough Energy Ventures, right? On some of I think partnership in this whole conversation is huge too, right? Like these are big worldwide problems that none of our companies can do by themselves. And so having partners. So for us, Breakthrough Energy Venture is one of those, and I have worked in the past with not only their group, but some of the venture, the ideas and the new companies that are being born out of that, venture capital. And there are some amazing female founders. I think up here in Boston, we also have, Greentown Labs and some great incubator organizations, and they have, specific, like I would say affinity groups for female founders. And so there's a real intention to get, more money into the hands of female founders. I think it's still abysmal. I think it's like 3% of the venture money goes to a female founder. That you can look up the statistics, but I think that was 1% several years ago, and now we're at 3%. So, I mean, it's slow, but it's moving in the right direction at least, right? So back to Mary's point, if you're a woman on the line and you have an idea, there's funding and there's resources and there's people who are looking for you, right? So sometimes we have to step in and make our ideas known as well.
I'll say also that, go ahead, Claudia.
We had a DEI table talk series last night for WEN Boston, and this was a major focal point. In general, I say there's, like Lynette said, I think there's a realization that more needs to be done, especially for women, minorities. because I feel like, are we recruiting the right people into our pipeline to make sure we have representation and diversification of thought? I've seen change, like Lynette said, in some of the corporations, right, really being intentful in terms of actively recruiting, even from not only the mature kind of professionals, but also as they go to different, colleges and communities. I think probably more needs to be done, right? So we definitely have a wider net as we kind of bring more folks into the industry, so that we're constantly, I mean, that's where diversity yields to innovation, right? Just different ways that we approach a problem. And we all firmly believe in that. But I think progress, yes. I think definitely need to see more folks at the table and helping us drive the transition.
I can say from a global company perspective, I've come to know that D&I is different. It's cultural, right? It varies regionally. I can say the US, Canada, very much upfront. What are we doing, both from like external and internal stakeholders, very much. In the EU, or like in the European context or in other contexts, the metrics differ, right? Whereas, we saw it in North America. If we are not aligning on metrics with the global team, we definitely need to develop our own for the region, because this is not going to stop, right? And we need to be able to track D&I in the supply chain, our own targets at the region. So that has evolved, right? That has evolved in the last like 2-3 years to kind of like put a name on it, put a target on it, let's put it out there, because there are differences and when you're working in the global space, right? You're not always going to align on targets. When it comes to, women and minorities in the energy sector, I think we have to be vocal. I mean, I'm also, Mexican, Latina. I'm now coming across more, but even I think it starts in the youth, like educating youth and to putting yourself out there and mentoring, and also going to schools and talking about STEM, WEN, everything, right? But sharing, because I think, growing up, I didn't have like an energy club, a robotics club, no, much less I see a woman in that position, right? Or even a Latina woman, even, that was even less common, or at least in let's say in my area where I grew up. So I think all of this is really important. I think there's a lot to do. I think we all have a role to play. But it's certainly something that I think we have to kind of, we kind of have to like engage, right? And just sort of contribute to that awareness.
It's worth mentioning, I previously mentioned the SEC's proposal on human capital, but they're also expecting one on board diversity. And so just coming down to the fact that it's not only, how many women are in the workforce, but where those women sit in the workforce and the degree of influence that they have, and not just women, but all like minorities, et cetera, other people who have been historically underrepresented. So I think that's the direction that things tend to be moving. And, we'll see. It seems like change is accelerating rapidly. So not just happening, but happening faster than ever. So maybe that trend will continue, but it's probably not there yet.
Even the topic of women on boards, right? There's a couple of great organizations like 50/50 Women on Boards, or the Athena Alliance helps people get ready to sit on boards. Specifically in the energy space, C3E, the Department of Energy, along with Stanford and MIT and maybe one other, they really specifically look at women in the leadership space within the energy space, right? So there are some really great organizations besides WEN, of course, to plug in to help get our numbers up in some of those leadership positions.
Yeah. All right. Well, ladies, we're about at the end of the hour. Again, thank you, Lynette, Mary, Claudia, and Lizette, for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. And for those of you who asked questions, we appreciate it. Again, WEN's a great organization for this. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day. And please don't hesitate to reach out if anything comes to you after the call.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.